All right, we're talking to former New York Times reporter and author Alex Berenson. How many books, Alex?
I've written 12 novels, 12 spy novels, which I'd be interested to know if you ever read, if you like them or not, and 2 nonfiction.
Well, I'll have you back on. We'll do a whole podcast talking about spy stuff another time. But for now, we're trying to prevent the country from destroying itself over this virus. So there are a few ways that I want to take our discussion now, and one of them is just you've gotten all of his attention nationwide. I saw you on Tucker's show on Fox, and I've seen you on Twitter, and you're just digging into the data. And now that makes you like an enemy of the state for some people. I mean, that's the most evil thing anyone could do is look at what the government was telling us a week ago. I mean, I've been pointing out that the public health experts that we're supposed to worship, like whatever St. Birx and St. Fauci say is a, it's like ex cathedra from the Pope. And in reality, they've been wrong over and over again with this whole thing. I mean, they've been wrong from the beginning. They've been wrong in key ways. Cuomo is now saying we got to wear masks if we're in public in New York. Let's start with that. Is there any actual data to show that there is a substantial enough risk of spread in open air in the public that we should be shutting down parks, playgrounds, and telling people now you have to wear a mask if you're out in the open air?
So no. The quick answer to that question is no. There's actually a paper that someone just sent to me, and one of the privileges I've had in the last few weeks is that because people sort of figured out that I'm trying to get data, they send me stuff to read, and if it makes sense to me, I'll put it online for others to read and comment on. There's a paper that came out of China last week that got no attention, where a bunch of Chinese researchers looked at clusters of infections outside of Wuhan, the rest of China, and they tracked 300 clusters of infections, meaning more than 3 people were infected. And they found not one of those took place outside. Of the 7,000 cases that they were able to track, 2 infections occurred outside. Infections in this occur primarily in 2 ways. They occur in the home, and they occur in hospital settings. And they also may occur in subways and sort of planes and public transportation that you're stuck in for a while. They don't occur outside. And to me, this is one of the absolute insane things about this. By the way, almost no infections occurred at retail or offices either, but none occurred outside.
Yeah, I mean, in New York, where we've been hit. Now, you're in New York too, right? So you're dealing with this, and I know your wife is a frontline healthcare worker.
She is a physician who treats COVID patients.
Yeah. Okay. So
and
that
I can tell you this, and we have children. Okay, we take no precautions at home about this because we know what the risks are to our children, and we're not being cavalier about it. We just know what the risks really are. And to me, the number one thing that we're doing to children here is we are locking them up. We are frightening them. In some cases, we are sticking them in homes with abusive parents, and they can't go out and they can't be seen by teachers. And we're doing this even though they are at zero risk from this, effectively zero risk.
Yeah, and I want to ask you also.
It makes me so angry.
I want to ask you about the broader, because we've seen this. If we're looking at the two sides of the scale, it has all been on suppress the virus, and whatever we have to do to the economy, like that doesn't have effect on lives and health and longevity and a whole bunch of other things. And I want to get to that with you, but I do also. There are 2 non-consensus ideas / models out there, and I'm asking. There's some theorizing. So far, I've really been saying, what does the data show us, which is what you've been doing. Okay, fine. But on 2 other areas, I want to ask. The first is the Sweden approach, which was what I had thought from the beginning would be more sensible than what we've done. Right? Sweden has not locked down all public spaces, has not said all businesses are shut down, no bar service, but you can still go to a restaurant, just sit at tables. And what do we know about how Sweden, because I feel like there's a pressure on Sweden now that this becomes political instead of science driven, that, oh gosh, every country in the world that's done a shutdown is going to be, and their press as well is going to say, well, Sweden is doing a terrible job here. Well, how is it going in Sweden?
So it's going reasonably well in Sweden. They're in much better shape than the UK or Spain or France or Italy. They appear to have a somewhat higher fatality rate than the other Nordic countries. It's not quite clear why that might be. They also have a large immigrant population, and apparently a lot of the excess mortality is in that population, although I haven't looked at the data well enough to know exactly how much. But But the Swedes, I mean, if you compare them to, let's say, Italy or Spain or France, the countries that really locked down the hardest, they're doing much better. If you compare them to Finland or Norway, they're doing a little bit worse. But I think there's something else that's been forgotten here, which is that Germany, which is the largest and most important country in Europe, is moving away from its lockdown. It's not happening yet, but within a week, I believe they're going to start to reopen some businesses. And on May 4th, they've said they're going to reopen schools.
And so isn't Spain also beginning to look at that too with the schools?
They are beginning to. And Japan, Japan is interesting. So Japan, not only did Japan not lock down, they haven't done a lot of testing. The public health people would say they've done everything wrong. And Japan, has very close connections right now economically and in terms of tourism with China. And Japan has an elderly population and has a lot of smoking. You would think that Japan would be devastated by this virus. And in fact, it hasn't happened that way at all. And people keep saying, well, 2 more weeks it's going to happen in Japan. Well, it's been 3 months in Japan. If this were going to have happened there, it would have happened.
Why do you think Japan hasn't been hit as hard?
Well, that's a really good question. I think that, there is a culture of wearing masks. And, I didn't answer the question before when you asked about masks. There's some evidence that masks protect or they slow the spread of transmission. Maybe both by slowing, the viral particles that are coming out of you, and they also prevent you from touching your face. So maybe it's masks, maybe it's social distancing. It's a culture where they're bowing instead of shaking hands. Nobody really knows, though. That's the short answer.
And have you seen, and by the this theory may be, this might be even too far out there for you, but I wanted to ask because it has been reported by a lot of different news organizations that the Israeli, and I'm trying to remember his exact title, but it was essentially like the Israeli head of their equivalent, I believe, of NASA.
Yes, that's right.
Has come out and said, if you look at what has happened, this virus, whether you lock down or don't, has a 6 to 8 week cycle that it rips through. What do you say? I mean, is that crazy town? Is that worth a second look, or where do you fall with that?
He's saying that's what the data shows. I don't know that means anything because, people would say, well, it would have been much worse in Italy and Spain, but they did lock down. Okay, well, how does that explain Sweden? Here's the problem. Here's the problem, Buck. We are all dealing from incomplete information, and the most important piece of information of all would be how many people have already been infected and recovered. Okay, because if that number in the United States is 1 million, we have a huge problem, right? Because this has caused a huge amount of, loss of life, and it's only infected 1 million people. If that number is 100 million, then all of a sudden this is the flu. Okay, all of a sudden this is something that seasonally is going to affect a lot of people, infect a lot of people, and kill a few. Okay, and we tolerate that every year with the flu. We need that number. Whatever it is, whether it's a bad number or a good number, a higher number is a better number. And for whatever reason, the public health establishment, for all the work they're doing, has not prioritized getting antibody tests out. And I don't know why.
Yeah, I would want to get out and get one right away. I'm somebody who had a very weird illness, and I know everyone is kind of turned into a hypochondriac by this, but I had a bizarre cough for days and days that kept me up late in the night, a shallow cough, right around the first week of January. And, that's a little early for what we saw here. But let me ask you about that. Do you think that this was here before? I had an esteemed doctor of infectious disease in New York affiliated with a major hospital here tell me that he would bet a large sum of money that it was here before at least weeks, if not a month or two, before officially it was recognized. What does the data tell us, and what do you think?
Oh, there's no question. It was in the United States in early to mid-January. We know that because we know it was in Seattle. And there's no reason to believe Seattle is an outlier. Seattle has air connections with China, but so does New York City, so does Los Angeles, so does San Francisco. And we know the virus was spreading aggressively in Wuhan in December. And there's this crucial question of what the R is, the replication rate, the transmissibility of the virus. So if one person infects 2 other people, you get to big numbers. But if one person infects 3 other people on average, you get to giant numbers. And to this point, I think we're still debating that. I think, that people have moved up their estimates of the R from, maybe the 2 range to closer to the 3 range. But they're, because the cycle is relatively fast and of the way exponential growth works, we need to know precisely. That's something else we don't know precisely. And we don't know, by the way, whether they are in a place like New York where people are getting, on underground train cars for an hour a day or more is different than Houston, where people are sitting in their cars all day.
Well, the Los Angeles to New York comparison. Yeah, I mean, I'm a New Yorker, born and raised, and I've spent a lot of time in LA too. And if you think about the way this is supposed to spread, it's not a surprise at all that Los Angeles has far lower incidence of this than what we're seeing. And so I want to ask also about test and trace, because I hear Fauci talking about this all the time. And I mean, maybe it's because I come from an intel and law enforcement background, but they really think they're going to be able to trace every contact that a human has with this to me, this is just on its face. And by the way, if I'm missing something, please do tell me. This seems like a ridiculous solution, but it's also one of those things that we talk about as though if we just wait until the testing capacity gets to this level, then we'll know as soon as the disease pops up, and we'll know everybody that it touches, and we'll be able to lock it down. That's Fantasyland stuff as far as I can see, but am I missing something? And I know you're dealing with this stuff all day.
So it's, I haven't looked too hard at the test and trace stuff because I'm so busy with other stuff. But I would come at it from a different point of view, Buck. And this is an issue that I've raised a couple of times recently. The lockdown orders, if they're constitutional, they are barely constitutional. Okay, based on what we now know about the dangerousness of this, and so far people have not really challenged them in court yet. But I would think that that's going to start to happen. But when you come to test and trace, you're talking about a whole different, can of worms. Are we seriously going to expect people to put apps on their phones? Are we going to expect them, that HIPAA somehow doesn't apply to this? Listen, if I get, some other virus, the government, it's not the government's job necessarily to know it and to, follow up with all my contacts, although I know that can't happen with HIV. So there is some precedent for this. But this is a much more aggressive form of, sort of governmental reaching into people's lives than I think people have realized. And it's surprising to me that issue has not come up. But we really do seem to have thrown out or forgotten our constitutional rights in any meaningful way here. And by the way, that's not an issue just for the right. This is supposed to be something the left cares about. This is something that the ACLU is supposed to care about. Where are they on this?
Where should we go from here? Given what we know, given what you've seen with the data up to this point, what would be sensible next moves in your opinion?
So I would say, first of all, we should reopen the schools as quickly as possible. And, the children, again, it is unfair what we are doing to children here. And it is wrong. And we should immediately drop the stuff about you can't go outside, you can't play outside. Listen, if governments want to make people wear a mask in stores, I think it's sort of silly based on what we know about transmission, but it's not the worst idea in the world. But the outdoor stuff is terrible, and there's very, very little evidence that it does any good. So that should go. And the schools we should reopen as quickly as possible. And if there are teachers out there, if there's a 7-year-old teacher who's got comorbidities and she's scared, let's find some accommodation there. But most teachers are relatively young and healthy. Let's get our kids back in school. It's important for them. Second, let's actually acknowledge that the hospitals are not being overrun right now anywhere outside New York City. And even in New York City, the problem is now becoming under control. Okay, so that means let's very quickly, in a matter of days, have some prospectively defined measures for hospital utilization and new admissions of COVID cases. And when they're below a reasonable number, doesn't have to be, it shouldn't be like the hospitals have to be 2/3 empty. It should be, if the hospitals are running reasonably, we're going to open stores. First, we're going to open offices, okay? And then very quickly, in a matter of days, we'll get to open stores, and then we can open hospitality. And the last thing probably should be these, big group events, because obviously there's some risk of super spreading at an arena rock concert or something like that. So that can be last. So those are good things. On the flip side, what do we need to do? We need to protect the people who are really at risk here. That means people over 70, people in nursing homes, people in hospitals. Let's make sure that nobody's visiting them who doesn't have a fever check, or ideally has either a negative COVID test or, even better, antibodies, so we know that they've already recovered from this. Let's make sure that that we try to get nursing home staff checked every day. Let's make sure that if somebody dies overnight from a flu-like illness, we in a nursing home, we test everybody right away. Let's focus on the vulnerable instead of destroying our society and pretending that everyone is at the same risk.
Alex, really appreciate the work you've done on this and your willingness just to ask questions and look at the data at a time when the panic is part of the pandemic. There's no question about that in my mind.
There's a line, that movie Contagion, that Steven Soderbergh movie from 2011. It was advertised with the line, "Nothing spreads like fear," and it turns out that he was right. That's true. And I truly believe right now, and look, maybe I'm wrong, but I truly believe that we're going to look back on this in a year or 5 years as one of the worst public policy mistakes in the history of the United States. And I mean, I just don't know what else to say but that. It's incredibly upsetting to see what's going on and to see what the data really says.
Well, Alex, we're going to have you back as this continues to roll out, because it's going to be at least weeks, if not months, of us still dealing with this, certainly here in New York City. And everyone should follow. If you're on Twitter, you want to follow Alex Berenson and see what he's putting out every day. And also you can find his books on Amazon. Alex, thanks so much for your time, my friend. We do appreciate it.
Thanks, Buck.
Stay safe.
So we just had snow. I've got snow on the ground here in Michigan right now in Lansing. We're expecting, up to 30 inches in the Upper Peninsula. The fact that we're cracking down on people traveling between homes or planting or landscaping or golfing really for a couple more weeks isn't going to meaningfully impact people's ability to do it, because the snow will do that in and of itself.
Oh yeah, it's snowing. The governor of Michigan's telling you it's snowing. What does that have to do with anything? No one knows, but Gretchen Whitmer, who has been talked about as a possible VP candidate for Biden. Of course, a lot of people now, we're hearing so much about Stacey Abrams and Elizabeth Warren. And there's all these people that are out there that maybe will be Biden's VP nominee or VP. Whitmer, though, is one of the people who's gotten, I think, some of the most deserved criticism over the petty authoritarianism at the state level from a governor for shutting down things that you can't go from one home that you own. So if I own two homes, which first I got to own one, but let's just say I own two homes in Michigan, and I wanted to drive from, say, my house to a cabin that I own, that technically is illegal. How can that make any sense at all? I'm going in a car from one residence I own to another residence I own. How could that be? How is that in any way justifiable? I mean, this is the problem. We assume that those, and I shouldn't say we, but people assume that those in power and those in charge will make reasonable, common sense decisions. But history, and even very recent history, shows us that is not the case. People in power do dumb stuff all the time, which is why our government's all about limiting power.
There is a little bit of a pattern, the temper tantrum at the governor's, then backing off and being nice. Total authority, then backing off. Now trying to adjourn this Senate. I mean, every day it appears to be, some might say, an attempt to just make news. So people watch these useless briefings, and these poor scientists and doctors have to sit there in the cold, listening to the president as he abuses his power repeatedly, time and time again, for 2 hours a day.
You know what's useless? Morning Joe. That show is useless. It really, as I've said, it's the dumb, mean, but somehow still considered cool kids in high school who never do their homework and have nothing to offer, but they gather together, and people who are also insecure seek their approval. That's Morning Joe as a media entity. It's just idiocy every day. And it's disappointing that there are still people that think that that's a worthwhile exercise of their right to consume media. I think it's bizarre. And frankly, I can't imagine spending time hearing Mika, Brzezinski. Of course, we all know her last name, a famous last name. It's why she got the jobs. What? Why? Makes no sense to me. And, I'm even going to say it. This guy, Willie Geist, I don't know him. Always seems like a fair-minded guy. Always comes across as a more reasonable guy operating in the unreasonable world of the big media. So I'm a little disappointed when he's saying he's also part of the Morning Joe panel world and all that. But I'm disappointed when he says stuff like this. Play 3.
And the thing we know about Donald Trump is that he likes to be praised. So one way he could earn praise, as you said earlier, is to get up there and get something done. Instead of attacking reporters and going after the WHO and going after the press and going after governors, what if he stood up there? It's 2 months late, but what if he stood up there and said, today I'm announcing a new national program to get testing done. The quicker we test, the quicker you get back to work. I'm at the command of this ship, and we're going to get testing out into the country. That would be something substantive, worth us and worth the country listening to every day, instead of what we get, which is invented councils from CEOs who didn't know they were on the council, learned from the Rose Garden a couple of days ago. What if he stood up there and announced something substantive that actually addressed the problem in front of us?
I feel like he does that every day. It's almost like we're not watching the same press conference. Yeah, he slaps around the press, but that's because the press comes at him with nonsense all the time. That's because the press uses this as an opportunity for fame seeking among their own constituencies, which they just open themselves up to a president who's not going to stand for that crap. He's just not going to do it. He's not going to do it. And so what is that really supposed to accomplish? We all know that it's so that they get that viral moment on CNN or MSNBC or ABC News or one of these places. And it's not helping us. It's not helping you and me understand more information. I mean, look at the conversation that I had today with Alex Berenson. You don't have to agree with what Alex's positions are. There's a lot of questions. He admits there's a lot of things he doesn't know. He's not a doctor, but they're making decisions that affect every single one of us. So you're not a doctor. You don't get an opinion thing. That's not how this republic works. That's not how this game's going to be played, folks. At least not on my watch. Not without me having a problem with it. But Alex is trying to give people worthwhile information. He's trying to approach this from a point of intellectual honesty. The rest of the media, they're just cheerleaders for whatever they think their audience wants to hear. It's disgusting. It's dumb. It's wrong. But that's what we get. Anyway, I actually expect more from Willie Geist. Because he says, why is he going after the WHO? Because the WHO failed massively in this whole process. So they can fail at the one, they had one job and they can fail and there's no accountability for it. That doesn't make sense to me. I don't think that that's acceptable. And Trump getting things done. We got so many masks and so many ventilators now showing up because that's what they told. They said, oh my gosh, we don't have masks and ventilators. The stockpile's depleted. We heard all that stuff, right? So Trump's like, all right, Defense Production Act, mount up. The cavalry's coming. Here we go. Oh, actually, we don't need it. We don't need all those ventilators. We've got a serious problem here. Hospitals are really stretched in a few places, but overall, they were wrong with the projections they had for how much gear and how much equipment was going to be needed on the ventilator side for sure. So Trump did get something done. It's not his fault that they were asking for things that then they didn't need.